I want to talk a little bit about people who have influenced some of my research outside of my Cronite and Lovelock Cave research. Namely, I'd start off with William Cooper. I believe he was one of the pioneers that began talking about the one world government and the shenanigans of false flags. I don't agree with everything that he said, but this guy really got the ball rolling. He was a competition for Alex Jones, and he was basically murdered by police. And it is so unfortunate that he is not alive today, because he would have checked Alex Jones and that whole Zionist fake alternative news and really have been a powerful, just a powerful person in this whole arena. But you can find a lot of his talks and the book he did online. Another person is Josh Reeves. He's still alive. The work that he did on the Council for National Policy is just amazing. He did some videos called The Right, The Secret Right, I believe it's called. And it's worth looking into. Right now, I was looking at his site. He has Bell's palsy. He's not doing well. And it's unfortunate because doing this kind of work is not healthy for you at all. Either, you end up dead, in poverty, you're not part of the system. It's very difficult to make a living that way. It's just a sad situation. Now, another person would be this Mae Brussell. Interestingly enough, she was Jewish. And she did a lot of pioneer work on the Church of Satan's offshoot, Michael Aquino, at the Temple of Satan, the involvement in pedophile rings. And she ended up dead after her daughter was killed in a strange car accident. She died of a fast-acting cancer. The next person I'm starting to learn about is this Dr. Tony Martin. He was a black professor in black history, and he started to get into studying the slave trade, and he really put it together about who owned and ran that slave trade, and they tried to ruin him. And he died unexpectedly at the age of 70. So, it's another one of those, really, how did the guy die? Helen Blavatsky, very interesting. She's very lucky they didn't kill her. There was another lady, I think it was, I can't remember her name, Lady Queensborough, I believe her name was. And she wrote some very good books about the occult and secret societies as well, and she ended up dead at an early age. So Helen Blavatsky was very lucky not to get snuffed out when she was putting a lot of things out there. Another person I find incredibly interesting is William Guy Carr, who wrote Pawns in the Game. Very good. Talking about this New World Order early on. Exposing the 3 World War plans before they even happened. So I'm going to conclude this with a video that I kind of took off of YouTube from this Dr. Tony Martin, just to give you an idea of people you never really hear about and how very well versed and learned they were, and they never really got the attention they should have because they stumbled into things that the powers that be don't want you to know. And as I said, this guy died mysteriously at about 70 after he started to get a little bit of fame and some traction out there with what he was learning. And again, another one gone. So it is a thankless job to do this kind of work. It's dangerous. Even if you're a Jew and you're exposing this and you say a little too much, you end up dead way before your time. This is just the researchers. I haven't even talked about the list of hundreds, probably thousands of people along the way that have been murdered, and it was billed as a suicide or some mysterious death because they stumbled into something that was a crime and they exposed it. Or they wrote a book about some of these top people up in the higher echelons of the system. And they end up with 2 bullet holes in the back of the head and it's ruled as a suicide, or they get poisoned if they oppose the Federal Reserve System. They end up dead. They end up missing. Ray Grykar is another person who was the head DA on the Jerry Sandusky case. They've never found that guy's body. They don't even know what happened to him. He was getting ready to bust that whole pedophile ring out in Pennsylvania area, and he couldn't get to it, and he's disappeared. No one's ever found him. So this is incredibly dangerous work. It's a thankless job. Most of the people involved don't make any kind of money on it. They're struggling financially. They have to put up with a lot of garbage from just trolls or just idiots. On top of it, when they get a little too famous or a little too much influential, they end up dying. Something happens to them, they get a warning, or they get ruined. You know, some of the other people, too, get framed for some kind of concocted crime. So you have to keep yourself clean and decide how far you're going to go in what you're doing. Especially, too, if you have family members that you're concerned about. So while you're watching these YouTube videos and you're anonymous with your YouTube name in your safety of your home and nobody knows who you are, I would like you to just remember that to get you the truth of what is going on, so many people have paid the price. They've been murdered, ruined, living in poverty. You know, they can't keep a job. They got fired for doing this, or to do this kind of work, they had to take a low-paying job, something simple, and concentrate on this work. Or they had their reputation destroyed, whatever. And you need to appreciate that. And like I said, there's people that have just disappeared, like Ray Grykar, completely off the map. No body found. No one knows what happened to the guy. And nobody talks about it anymore. So for me, I have to decide how far I'm going to go and when, and strategically how I'm going to do it, because this is dangerous. Just me talking about the Cronides in Lovelock Cave gets me into a potential dangerous situation. If I was to go further and really start doing stuff like this, I'd have to be even more careful. So appreciate your researchers, because they don't stick around if they get too influential. If you can support them, do so. I'm not talking about the phonies who are in this alt-right, and they're all Jews. They're all suddenly getting 200,000 subscribers on YouTube within a month, and they're getting paid somehow from somewhere, like Milo or Laura Loomer or Gavin McGinnis or Alex Jones, some of those people. I'm talking about the real deal. So think about it and be supportive when you see this. When you see people like this who have really put their lives and livelihood on the line to help you get free and change things for a better life for all of us, as well as look for some justice for the victims of the crimes of what has happened on this planet. That's all I want you to think about in this video. It's just something I have to call out to the people who have come before, and like I said, there's maybe a few of them today that are still alive, but they're not doing well. Thank you.
Hold up, my brothers and sisters, and thank you very much for this beautiful occasion. Yes, it is indeed true that Jews invented the Hamitic myth, whereby it was said that Ham, the son of Noah, was cursed in the book of Genesis. And somehow it was said that Ham was the progenitor of the African race, and that all Africans would be cursed and enslaved for time immemorial because of this so-called biblical curse on Ham. We now know that it was Jewish scholars who invented the story of the Hamitic myth, which has plagued black people from that point on. Yes, it is true. We now know that Jews were very importantly involved in the slave trade in medieval times, both, as Professor Clark has said, in the East, in the Arabic areas, and also in Europe. That is even before our African slave trade to the Americas. Yes, it is true, as we now know, the Jews were the ones who invented what came to be known as white slavery, whereby Jewish entrepreneurs in Europe in the late 19th century prostituted their own Jewish women, sent them around the world as prostitutes. What came to be known as white slavery. Yes, it is true, as we now know, the Jews were heavily invested in the Dutch West India Company. The Dutch West India Company, that company which was a private corporation doing the job of colonizing, which was responsible in large measure for the African slave trade. The Dutch West India Company that owned the Elmina Fort in what is now Ghana. The Dutch West India Company that brought slaves from Africa to the Caribbean, to South America. The same Dutch West India Company that brought the first slaves to New York when it was still New Amsterdam. Yes, it is true, as we now know, that the Jews were the major element in the slave trade in Brazil in the 1600s, in Suriname, in Curacao, in Barbados, in Jamaica. Yes, it is true, as we now know, that the two largest single shipments of slaves coming into this country in the 18th century were on ships owned by Jews. It is true, as we now know, that Aaron Lopez, biggest slave ship owner in the United States of America, was a Jew. It is also true, as we now know, that all the rum distilleries in Newport, Rhode Island, in the era of the slave trade were owned by Jews. Rum, as we know, was a very important item in the transatlantic slave trade. Yes, it is true, as we now know, that there was a higher per capita ownership of slaves in the United States of America by Jews than by white Gentiles. We now know from the 1830 census of the US of A that something like 75% of Jewish households own slaves, as opposed to just 30-odd% for the white population as a whole. All of this information is contained in the secret relationship between blacks and Jews. And all of this information is based on the work of Jewish historians. So how come that we have a situation, an amazing situation developing here, where the Jewish leadership in this country is trying to deny the undeniable? And the only reason why the Jewish leadership has been able to place itself into this untenable and indefensible position, it seems to me, is because they have become drunk with power. They have gotten into the habit of easy victories over our people. Professor Clark said no more easy victories. They have won some easy victories in the past, and they have become so drunk with the power coming out of those easy victories, and have become so arrogant and so conceited that they have come to the point now where they believe that they can in fact defend the indefensible. The Jeffries case has shown that the time has come to an end, that from now on they will be forced to deal on an intellectual level with an aroused black community. And once we force them to deal on an intellectual level, the Jeffries case has shown, and I hope that my case will show, that they cannot win. Jewish power over black institutions in this country is based in large measure on the apparent liberalism of Jews in relation to black people in the 20th century. And what this book does, by showing the Jewish role in slavery and the slave trade, it punctures that balloon, that liberal balloon. It shows that Jews were in fact not a liberal community as far as black people were concerned for most of the history of Africans in America. And so as soon as that balloon is punctured, the whole apparatus of Jewish power over black people, which rests on this alleged Jewish liberalism, then becomes in a very perilous situation. And that, to my mind, partially explains the frenetic, crazy, insane way in which the Jewish community has tried to defend the indefensible by trying to deny their involvement in the African slave trade. Now, Jewish liberalism, like I said, is a 20th century phenomenon. Apparent Jewish liberalism is a 20th century phenomenon. Clearly, they weren't liberals during the slave trade if 75% of the Jewish households had slaves, and if they owned the largest shipments of slaves coming to this country, and if they owned all the rum distilleries in Newport, Rhode Island. The major initial apparently liberal activity of the Jewish population in relation to African Americans was in the formation of the NAACP in 1909. Much of that claim to liberalism lies in the fact that many major influential Jewish persons were among the founders of the NAACP. Some of the founders of the NAACP were not only prominent Jews, but were actually leaders of the American Zionist movement. You had the leaders of the American Zionist movement founding the NAACP. Could you imagine if Marcus Garvey had founded the ADL? Would anybody have taken Marcus Garvey seriously as a Pan-Africanist if he had founded the American Jewish Committee? They would instantly have looked at his motivation for so doing. Now we have discovered what the motivation is, even as I speak, for the last 2 or 3 months. Amazing revelations have been coming out in the press. Revelations suggesting that Joel Spingarn, the Jewish chairman of the NAACP, was actually spying on his own black NAACP membership. Spying for US military intelligence. What kind of a liberal was that? Marcus Garvey, our most perceptive leader, Brother Ilombe was talking about race first, but this is amazing. Race first, as Ilombe said, was written 20 years ago as a PhD dissertation. But in race first, there's a quotation that goes something like this. And here Garvey is talking about white liberals. He didn't zero in on Jews per se, but he was talking about the white liberals in the NAACP, many of whom, as we know, were in fact Jews. And Garvey said that the white liberals were only about what he called disarming, disvisioning, and disambitioning the Negro, as he put it. He said that the white liberals were only about removing the African from the path of self-reliance and self-determination. And then Garvey went on to make a very significant statement. He said the liberals in the NAACP were nothing but spies. These are the exact words of Garvey, quote, spies for the rest of the white race, unquote. If one wants to really see the liberalism of the whites and Jews in the NAACP, one has to look not on the fact that they founded the NAACP, one has to look at their attitude towards Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association. In the UNIA, we had at the very same time the major organization in our history attempting to provide for us self-reliance and self-determination. And the white liberals, Jew and Gentile, in the NAACP targeted Marcus Garvey's effort at self-reliance as their major objective to attack. So here you find the real liberal agenda of the whites and Jews in the NAACP in the attitude to Marcus Garvey. The man has been said earlier who sent Marcus Garvey to jail in his famous case in 1923 was Julian Mack. And Julian Mack wasn't only a Jew, he was also an influential member of the NAACP.